Welcome to Deepening Intimacy. This series was designed as first aid for love, helping all of us go deeper into our own hearts and into connecting with the heart of our beloved so that we can actually realize in our lives the great promise of intimacy. Thanks for joining us. My name's Tammy Simon, and I'm your host for this series on deepening intimacy. And in this episode, my guest is Bruce Tift. Welcome, Bruce.
Thank you. I'm pleased to be here.
You live here in Boulder, Colorado, been teaching at Naropa for many years, and are one of the go-to relationship therapists that many people who are on a Buddhist path or deeply interested in spirituality often go to help them with their relationships. And to begin with, what I'd love to know is, in working with hundreds and hundreds of couples now, people come to you, and let's say that their primary concern is the theme of this series, which is deepening their sense of intimacy. Perhaps they're a couple that have been together for 5, 10, 15, 20 years, something like that. And there's a sense on one or both people's part, I just wish we were closer. I know there's more available, more contact, more depth of love and intimacy, maybe sexuality that's available, but we don't know how to get there on our own. Bruce, can you help me? And what I'd love to know are, what are some of the core themes? I'm sure now, in working with so many couples, you could say, well, there are maybe a few key themes that present themselves. What are they, and how do you help people move deeper?
Maybe it would be appropriate to start with the obvious, that to me, which is intimacy is so alive and mysterious that I don't think anybody has the answers to any of those questions, and a lot of people approach it in different ways. I happen to approach my work more from a masculine energy point of view. I'm very interested in the unresolvable nature of intimacy, and so one of the themes that I find, somebody else might find a different theme, but what I find almost always is that in our culture, couples seem to equate intimacy and closeness.
Yeah.
And so if somebody says, I want to be intimate, almost always they mean I want to be close.
Yeah.
But I have the view that healthy intimacy, as one expression of life, requires this interplay, unresolvable tension between the fact that we're all separate people, we're all existentially alone, nobody's ever really going to understand us, we're responsible for working with our own experience, and the fact that we're all completely interconnected. We want to give and receive love. We hope to treat other people kindly and be treated well. So I usually find that almost all couples that come to therapy that I have met with have this idea that they want help in being closer. And what I happen to see as very basic couple dynamics is that almost all couples who are having difficulty with their relationship actually are too close. But that inappropriate closeness is happening on usually an unconscious level. I would say emotional fusion. Somebody might say codependency, enmeshment, entanglement. And that in the way I see it, couples almost always have unconsciously agreed to ritualize their relationship to maintain certain symptomatic problems to get some relief from that inappropriate claustrophobic enmeshment.
Okay, but let's say somebody's listening and says, Bruce says that we're actually too close.
Yes.
My partner's travels half the time. I can't get my partner to sit down and talk to me when I want to listen to me. What do you mean we're too close? What are you talking about?
Right. Well, too close in this sense obviously doesn't mean on the activity level. It means on the emotional level. And somebody can be maintaining a very enmeshed, fused attitude toward intimacy, whether their partner is present or not. And I would probably explore with that person, first of all, what is their objection to feeling alone? Because that is their experience. And if their partner came in, I would be curious about what their objection might be to feeling closer, because they have continued to choose to be in a relationship. But another theme that I happen to see a lot is that if it's accurate that we all have to be both separate and connected, almost all of us seem to enter adulthood out of balance with and identified with one over the other. And so most of us have a conscious identification with either I'm somebody who wants to feel self-sufficient and in control and I want my freedom, or I'm somebody who wants empathic relationship and connection and warmth and nurturance and communication. But I find that the other half of necessary life energy is always present. It's not negotiable. And so, interestingly, whatever our conscious presentation is as a style, I, at this point, just speculate that in some ways, even more basically, that person is more grounded in the opposite energy. So let's say this person, it's often a woman, but about a third of the time it's the man who carries that connecting energy. But if that person claims that they want more connection, then they're obviously feeling separate. And so I start to explore with that person that maybe their fundamental life experience might be that they feel profoundly alone. Otherwise, why would they dedicate so much of their life trying to get connection? But what, strangely enough, most of us do, I think, somewhat unconsciously, is that we end up attracting and being attracted to a partner who will manifest exactly what we have disowned in ourselves. So we hire a person, basically, to be the location of that part of ourself that we're not so comfortable with. And so I would say 9 out of 10 couples that I work with have this sort of complementarity of roles where the person who claims they want connection mysteriously ends up with this person who has a foot out the door. Because that's a necessary part of the connecting person's energy, their experience. But by hiring a person who's more separate, they get to relate to that energy. They have no danger of losing themselves in the relationship because the other person's going to have boundaries. They're going to be separate, but they don't have to take ownership of that energy in themselves. And so I happen to work with couples a lot about the possibility that each of us tends to find a partner who will manifest what we are not comfortable with in ourselves, and then sooner or later we start blaming them for being that way.
Yeah.
Because we're not very friendly with that part.
Yeah.
And I would say that most people I work with anyway, that resonates with. So
So we can take any imaginary couple here.
Right.
And one is going to be at the side of, I want more of you. I want more of your time.
Yes.
And one's going to decide, why don't you let me do what I want to do? Go out with my friends. And come on, why are you so needy?
Right.
And,
Get a life.
So, I think people can relate to that.
Okay.
Now what? now what? Here we are. We've come to see you, and this is our complaint. And the one who wants more connection has dragged the couple into therapy, potentially, or maybe the other partner says,
or
just so sick
they
of...
pretend to be dragged.
They pretend to be dragged,
Right.
but we're both
Yes.
sick of fighting over this issue. What do we do now, Bruce?
Well, I usually introduce the idea that when we hire somebody to represent, manifest a disowned aspect of oneself, that person becomes inappropriately important to us. If I gave you $1, I wouldn't really care what you did with it. But if I gave you my life savings, I'd probably get very hyper-vigilant about whether you were going to go on a vacation or not.
Right.
And so when we hire somebody to be the location of half of who we are, that person starts to be inappropriately impactful. A tone of voice, whether they've returned a phone call, whether they've walked out of the room when we're talking, things like that, seem to actually have this sort of survival level significance.
Yeah.
And so I often will explore the possibility that this inappropriate connection with one's partner actually arises from an inappropriate disconnection with oneself.
So I'm not quite following you there.
Okay.
How are each member of this couple disconnected from something in themselves?
My style is to be historically more identified with being the separate person. So I have a historic disconnection from dependency energy.
Yeah.
If I hire a partner who specializes more in dependency energy, then on one hand, I'm going to wish that she were more like me. Yeah. But actually, I'm going to keep enabling and supporting her to be the location of that energy, because then if she weren't, I might have to take ownership of it. And so...
And why don't you want to take ownership of it?
Well, my history was that it wasn't very smart for me to show my dependency because, as far as I know, neither of my parents were very comfortable with dependency energy. And I think I got rewarded at a very young age for being as independent as possible, as quickly as possible. It was just a smart way to be. And then there's gender training, there's life circumstances as they may happen.
Yeah.
And so, as far as I could tell, it was very intelligent for me. It wasn't unhealthy. It was very intelligent to disconnect from my dependency feelings, to suppress them, to compartmentalize. I fit into my family better. I got more rewards.
Yeah.
But that becomes characterological. The way we survive as children becomes characterological, and then that persists into adulthood. And so my disconnection from my dependency energy then makes me likely to try to find a partner unconsciously who will be dependent for me. And if it's a good fit, that person's probably had a history where it wasn't smart for them to be strong, angry, independent, have boundaries, things like that. So they hire me to be that way. So if this, this is all a view that I explore with somebody, and if it makes sense, then I present the sort of basic Western therapy view that a lot of the work of Western therapy is to recover experiential responsibility for those aspects of ourself that intelligently, but now in an out-of-date way, we have disowned. And so I present the practice and view of personal responsibility as the antidote to codependent dynamics. And a lot of my work is in that arena.
Okay, so let's say I'm the person who wants more closeness.
Or claims she does.
Or claims she does. Claims I want more closeness, let's say. I've been watching this whole series on deepening intimacy because I want my partner to be closer to me. This is my cry right now, greater closeness.
You should have her watch the series.
And that's part of my plan.
Okay, good.
I want to do that. And so I want greater closeness. So the disowned part of me is the part of me that really wants more separateness. I want things my way. I want to go. So how am I going to take personal responsibility? What are the steps that I need to take?
Well, your question in a subtle way is almost as if asking, what should I do, as if somebody else is going to tell me what to do. And so as a more fundamental attitude in therapy, I don't have the idea that I am responsible to be a change agent in people's lives. I have the idea that my job, what I'm being hired for, is to invite more awareness of what a person is experiencing, how they're behaving, what the consequences are. But I try to be very clear that I am not there to help somebody change.
And you still have clients? And
I know, it's amazing.
It's amazing. Yeah. Okay.
I think there's enough turnover.
Oh, okay, is that what it is?
So instead of telling somebody what they should do, I usually suggest that they may be having to deal with a dilemma, which is that no matter what they do, they're probably going to end up being disturbed. If I accept the fact that so far I seem to be in a relationship with somebody who, you say, Bruce, I chose, but anyway, who wants more separateness, who doesn't want this emotional engagement that I want, then either I stay in the relationship or I don't. But from the point of view of personal responsibility, if I'm not ending the relationship, I am choosing to be in the relationship.
Yeah.
And if I'm choosing to be in the relationship, I'm choosing to have to feel these feelings that I don't like to feel. But it's my choice. Nobody's forcing me. It's not being done to me.
Right.
And so from that point of view, I'm disturbed. If, on the other hand, I end the relationship and look for a partner who has more interest in emotional engagement, closeness, empathy, then I'm going to have to deal with the loss of this relationship, which obviously is very important to me, and there's a lot of good things about it. So if I stay in the relationship, I'm disturbed. If I end the relationship, I'm disturbed. I don't get a number 3 choice that is without disturbance. And so often I will work with people in a variety of ways to invite them to commit to the actual immediate embodied experience of disturbance, because they're not going to have an intimate relationship without that. And hopefully to stop complaining about that.
Now there's a quote that I want to read
Okay.
from the audio series that you produced with Sounds True called Already Free, Buddhism Meets Therapy, Meets Psychotherapy on the Path of Liberation. And here's the quote.
Okay.
I've been married for over 3 decades, and I've been disturbed in my relationship every day of my married life.
I was guessing that was the quote you were going to read.
So obviously disturbance is something that you've become quite used to, and that
Unfortunately.
and that you somehow think is possibly okay, not something that needs to be solved through psychotherapy. You're not obviously offering your clients a path that will lead to non-disturbance.
Yes, or through Buddhist practice also. Yes. I think our culture especially has this very strange idea. I think it's technically psychotic, meaning out of touch with reality, that we're supposed to somehow have a life without disturbance. And many of us use disturbance, emotional disturbance especially, as evidence that there's a problem that's supposed to be solved.
Yeah, well, I mean, okay, this may be psychotic, but this is the way the culture is sort of wired. I mean, I'm disturbed, and I'm going to get something, buy something, read a book, go to a therapist, so I'm not disturbed anymore. I don't want to be disturbed. It's uncomfortable to be disturbed.
That's very intelligent to not want to be disturbed, but I think some people anyway, after 10 or 20 years of relationship, of meditation, of psychotherapy, of drugs, of exercise, of meditation, of whatever, have found that nothing has given them a life without disturbance. So some people are ready to explore the counterinstinctual discipline of committing to difficult feelings as being a legitimate, necessary part of our human experience and not evidence of a problem. But that's not a popular view, and it's not an easy type of work to go into our fear, grief, rage, panic, anxiety. Nobody wants to do that, which is why I think an attitude of discipline is actually essential for this stage of work.
So, Bruce, I just want to be clear and make sure that our listeners are clear. When you say I've been disturbed every day of my 30-plus years of married life, what do you actually even mean? What do you mean that you've been disturbed?
Well, first of all, partly because my wife is here watching, I should be clear.
She seems quite happy. So somehow,
good.
Being with us and being with you. So.
It seems very clear to me at this stage of things, not 20 years ago, that my disturbance is not caused by my partner, but that for some variety of reasons, I have a lot of sensitivities in the experience of intimacy that are constantly getting triggered. Often it's small, sometimes it's big, but by disturbed, I mean that I will say something and I don't get the response that I want from my partner, or she'll say something and it just triggers something. It rubs a little sensitivity that I have. And there's something just incredibly vulnerable about being so close to somebody for so long that any sensitivities, any little bruises, any sort of sore spots are going to get rubbed against when we get adequately close to somebody. And so I feel very vulnerable. It's often sort of hurt or unsupported or something for me, some sadness. My style is to convert my vulnerability into aggressive energy. So historically, I would feel irritated or critical or something like that. But it's just that it's so inescapable that it would be silly for me to say that that's not true. It may not be true of other people. I'm not claiming everybody's going to be disturbed every day of their relationship, but I have been.
Okay, so let's say somebody's listening to this and they're like, oh my God, what if my level of disturbance, whether it's sadness or poignancy or the feeling that, I care too much, whatever it might be, what if that is actually okay, not something I need to solve, but I'm really uncomfortable? How do I relate to this? I'm not trying to solve it anymore, but help me even just understand how to relate to this, if this is a normal part of intimacy.
Right. Well, in this work, I happen to find Buddhist practices more useful than the therapy practices. And my bias is to invite people, which has been my practice, to invite people to bring their attention out of their story about their disturbance into sensation level, immediate, embodied vulnerability. And to the best of their ability, stay out of any interpretation at all, any commentary, any attribution of cause. First of all, check it out and see, am I being harmed by this tight stomach or this hurt in my heart or my constricted throat? Yes, that's my biological association. We go into fight, flight, freeze responses. But if I check it out, where's the evidence of any problem? And I've never found any damage in feeling disturbed, although it feels like it. So I have to examine it. If I find that it feels like it's harmful, but it's not harmful, then it's safe to have a relationship with that disturbance. And if I hang in there and find not only is it not harming me, but it's not even permanent, it comes and goes, then it's safe to actually practice being kind to this disturbance because it's my disturbance. Nobody else on the planet is going to dedicate their life to being kind to my vulnerability. That's my work. It's just smart. It's not a moral issue. It's just smart for me to be kind to my own pain and my own fear and grief and rage. And so in Buddhist practices talked a lot about as far as a practice of unconditional kindness toward everything that arises. Mm-hmm. And I introduced that. I don't usually, unless somebody's interested, I don't talk about it as necessarily a Buddhist practice, but I definitely invite people to stay as immediate and non-interpretive and embodied as possible and find out for themselves, so it's not my theory, where's the problem? Because if I can learn to be kind to my pain, let's say, it's then somewhat organically and spontaneously more and more possible that I can be kind to this partner who's guaranteed to trigger this pain in me. Mm-hmm. But if another way of saying that is that being willing to have a relationship with my worst fears, my disturbance, is actually the practice of being intimate with myself. Mm-hmm. And I find that it's very difficult to be more intimate with one's partner than we are willing and able to be intimate with oneself. Mm-hmm. Because the closer you get to somebody, the more guarantee there is that any unresolved issues about relationship will be forced out into the open. Mm-hmm. And so most couples, most of us, I think, unconsciously agree to, again, ritualize the relationship to make sure that the degree of disturbance can be handled basically unilaterally by each person.
So I'm not sure I know what you mean when you say ritualize the relationship.
Well, when a couple is inappropriately close, in my opinion, most couples use a variety of mechanisms like unconscious or chronic conflict, miscommunication, sort of a mysterious loss of sexuality, over-functioning, under-functioning parent-child dynamics, turning into buddies, running the family, especially if there's kids, long-distance relationships, things like that.
Yeah.
Most of us use some combination of these apparent problems to guarantee relief from the underlying fusion. And by ritualized, I mean that if I meet with a couple and they start talking about their conflict, let's say, it's usually not a difficult conflict to solve. It's like, I get home and my partner's just on me immediately to take over and deal with the kids. And I get so aggravated. I work hard. Well, you don't know what it's like. You've got your work, you know.
Right, yeah.
And it's not hard. You know, they just negotiate that when the person gets home, they have a half an hour to settle in to themselves, and they go check in with their partner and take over the kids.
Sure.
And so most couples are dealing with what appear to be problems that are actually rarely significant problems.
Yeah.
But they've made an agreement to not solve their problem. Mm-hmm. And one of the main ways we've agreed not to solve our complaints about our partner is to blame the other person for our disturbance, because we can't change the other person. So as long as I'm saying you're the cause of my difficult feelings, I'm guaranteed to have that as an available distancing mechanism anytime I want it or need it. But as soon as I'm willing to take responsibility, I don't have that anymore. And these problems become pretty straightforward.
So let's say you gave the example of a couple whose sex life has mysteriously dried up, not having sex anymore. And let's say I'm in that kind of relationship and I want to take personal responsibility. How do I do that?
Well, I would probably start by exploring the possibility that you may have profoundly contradictory feelings about being sexual. Your claim is, I want to be more sexual, but that's not your behavior.
Yeah.
And so I'd first of all say, well, what would it be like to take ownership of the possibility that maybe you genuinely want to be more sexually intimate and you genuinely don't want to be? You know that the closer you are, the more you're going to get hurt. How would that be to own both of these feelings rather than believe that you only feel one way about it?
So do you think, I mean, it sounds like you're saying that most of the times when people present one side of something, there really is the other side living in them. No,
That's my experience, yes. I just count on it. I may be wrong, but I just count on that in my work. And for myself, if I hear myself saying something, I sort of count on the likelihood I have opposite feelings about that.
Now, there's another quote from your work that I want to bring forward
Okay.
that I thought was really interesting, that couples carry often a secret burden that we're not as close as we're supposed to be, that we've internalized this idea.
Yes, right.
That, so when I go out with my friends, I make sure that I look super lovey-dovey with my partner, because I would hate for everybody to know that we're only kind of close. We're not really like the model couple they think we are and stuff.
Yes,
And so we're all walking around, do you think, with this secret burden of like, God, I have to present fabulous coupleness, and nobody's really that close? Or tell me what you mean by that.
Well, of course, I wouldn't claim to know what all couples are doing, but I just find this so frequently that at least it's a common theme, not all couples, but many, many of us seem to have absorbed our cultural fantasy that intimacy is synonymous with closeness, and that the point of an intimate relationship is almost like as a refuge from a difficult life, and we're supposed to get together, maybe hit some problems, and then basically have a happy relationship.
I think that fantasy, that's my fantasy.
Again, I don't think there's a lot of evidence that that's many people's experience. So I have found in myself and in others, could be projection, but I think I have seen that frequently, that a couple knows that they have profoundly contradictory feelings about being close to their partner. They love their partner and they hate their partner. They want to be together. They can't wait for their partner to be gone. So
you're saying very taboo things that are true, Bruce.
Well, it may not be true. So, but when any of us go out in public, out in our, with our friends even, I find that it's very, very difficult to be honest. I mean, it is taboo to say, yeah, I love my partner, but that includes wishing they were dead sometimes and not wanting to be with them. That's included in my experience of love for my partner. We don't talk that way.
No, we don't.
We think that love is supposed to be positive feelings.
Yeah.
And so many people really, I think, suffer from a type of shame that they're not living up to this sort of standard that everybody else must be.
Yeah.
Because everybody else looks like they're only happy out in public together. And when you see a couple arguing, it's almost like there's this sort of, ooh, let's not pay attention to that. That's a problem.
Yeah.
That's not a valid part of intimacy. And I think that's, I can't change that, but I think that's too bad.
Okay. Now, what I'm imagining is someone listening and saying, okay, it's okay to be disturbed. It's okay to love and hate my partner, even to the point of admitting sometimes that I wish they would just, I can't even say the words that you said, disappear. Yeah. Okay. All that's true. So then I'm not trying to change anything in my relationship. This is just that I'm not trying to make it better. I'm not on the relationship improvement plan. What am I doing here then in this relationship?
Who knows? I don't think any of us know. I think we're all winging it as we go along. But to respond to your question, in very much the same way, I think that acceptance and improvement are also unresolvable, sort of contradictory appearing energies that both are valid, but appear to be sort of hard to do at the same time. Well, they are hard to do at the same time because our culture seems to be so out of balance on the side of improvement. I will accept myself when I've healed my early traumas, when I've become enlightened, when I've done whatever, have a job or money. I happen to suggest that people explore the acceptance part first, see what feelings come up if they imagine that things will never improve, either personally or in their relationship. What if this is as good as it got? What if I'm never a more enlightened person? What if we never are more intimate or sexual?
People are going to be out there hanging themselves at this point, Bruce.
Better them than me, right? So, what are the feelings that come up? Is it killing? Once again, if I stay embodied with that deep despair, is it harming me? And what most people find out after their initial disturbance is, well, I'm just acknowledging the way things are right now. But if I claim it's not acceptable, it's really a form of fundamental aggression toward my own self and my relationship by claiming that what is true, what is authentic in this present moment is unacceptable. We have to improve it before we accept it. Well, I think that's really unfortunate. So if somebody's willing to explore the experience of it, unconditional acceptance, then I suggest that it's, of course, very intelligent to try to improve ourselves, our relationship, our home, our parenting. But it's very different to make the effort of improvement from a ground of acceptance, because our worth as a person is not riding on the outcome.
Yeah.
It becomes actually a type of play or just practical issue, not like there's this desperate need at stake.
Mm-hmm. Now, I want to go back to something, because you talked about how 9 times out of 10 people get together and one partner is more on the side of separateness and individual autonomy, and one person's more on the connecting, closeness kind of side. This is how it goes. And that each person carries this unconscious actual investment in the other side that they're not owning. In your sense, is the quote-unquote goal, and I use that word carefully here, to become in balance, to be someone who's balancing separateness and closeness within myself and within the relationship? Is that the direction that you help couples go to?
Well, if we understand balance as 50% of this and 50% of that, I'd say no. But we can also understand balance as the capacity, which is very hard to cultivate, but the capacity to hold these contradictory qualities simultaneously at all times with no fantasy of resolution. And in Western therapy, the closest probably view that's similar to that is the work of differentiation. That's like Murray Bowen, currently David Snarch, people like that work from that idea that it's a more mature adult capacity to hold our feelings of separateness, in this case, and our feelings of connection simultaneously, giving up any fantasy of resolution. That way we can respond spontaneously from either energy.
Now, why do you use the word differentiation to describe that quality?
Well, that's just the language that Murray Bowen's began back in the 70s, 80s, and has continued in that tradition of Western therapy. But the larger view that speaks to me is the Buddhist view, which is understanding that these two apparently contradictory energies, let's say separateness and connection, upon investigation actually turn out to have no independent essential nature of their own. There's no such thing as just separateness. There's no such thing as connection. You can only connect if you're separate to start with.
Yeah.
You can only separate if you're connected to start with.
Yeah.
So in the jargon, they would be considered as co-creative. Their codependent origination is the jargon.
Yeah. That
we start to understand that these are basically cooperative experiences, not antagonistic experiences. And so from that point of view, our work is to appreciate the sort of unitive nature of our experience, even though it's displayed as apparently contradictory energies. That's more of a Buddhist view.
Yeah.
But in either case, the work in therapy would be to initially recover experiential responsibility for exactly the feelings that I very intelligently had to disown growing up, so that I don't have to keep hiring and projecting upon my partner my disowned energies. That way they become less inappropriately important to me, and I can actually start having a relationship with them for who they are rather than as an object of my projections. And if they are not so important, strangely enough, it becomes safer to be close to them or to be intimate with them. The more I'm grounded, embodied in my reality, the less of a threat that my partner's reality is going to be to me. But if I'm dissociative, if I'm sort of up here trying to be one way, then part of me is going to be very vulnerable to cueing off of other people's reality because I'm not grounded in mine.
Yeah.
So strangely enough, the more we are willing to be fundamentally, existentially alone, separate, then the safer it is to be connected. The more we're trying to be connected as an escape from our aloneness feelings, the less safe it is to be close to that person. And that's when we ritualize our relationship to have the guarantee of distancing problems.
Now, you use this phrase that no one else in the relationship series has introduced. Well, several phrases, actually.
Okay.
No one else has brought up disturbance. But also this
that's
phrase,
a surprise.
no one has, being effectively selfish.
Right.
That there is a role in relationship for being effectively selfish. So what do you mean by that? And what's effectively versus just being plain old selfish?
Right. Well, by effectively selfish, I hope to invite people to respect and appreciate and take ownership of the fact that until we have dissolved our fantasy of being alienated separate selves, of course, believe we're separate. We think we're a separate self, and as long as we think we're a self, we will be selfish. So it's really a question of, can we do a good job of our experience of being a separate self rather than a bad job? In therapy, ineffective selfishness really refers to our tendency to still try to handle our lives and our own experiencing, especially in intimate relationships, as if we were still a child in our family of origin. So we're trying things that had healthy origins, but now are several decades out of date.
Yeah.
And that's ineffective selfishness. It's not bad, it just doesn't work. So effective selfishness turns out to involve bringing ourselves into our current adult reality and current adult capacities so that, in my opinion, we take such good care of ourselves that we have no complaints, no resentment, no blame to our partner. Not because they've changed.
No, that you're finally saying something I think people want.
Oh, okay.
Bruce, I do think people want this.
Finally.
Yeah, finally. This is something they want. So far, nothing else. No,
Right.
But this people want. They want to
Okay.
have no blame,
Okay.
no resentment, etc.
Okay.
Yeah, people want that.
I want that,
Yeah.
As long as we think our partner is the cause of our disturbance, how can we not have a complaint about them? So this stage of work, which really corresponds to Hinayana Buddhism, is the practice of personal responsibility, where I start to get it slowly maybe, that the better care I take of myself, the less complaints I have about my partner. Not because they have changed. I can't change them. I don't have that power. But because I am taking such good care of myself. So, strangely enough, the point of effective selfishness, the point of constructive conflict even, is to allow ourselves to gradually develop the capacity to keep our hearts open to our partner regardless of how we feel about them at that moment. Regardless of whether we're having positive feelings or negative feelings. Because they're not the cause of our state of mind. I'm responsible for my state of mind, for working with it.
Okay, but I'm imagining someone listening who says, look,
I've lost
my
him again,
partner,
huh?
well, my partner already has this feeling of, I'm going to take care of myself. I know you're going to, blah, blah, but I need to take care of myself. Right. So I'm going to go to the gym and I'm going to do this and I'm going to do all these things because I'm taking care of myself.
Right.
And this person thinks, okay, listening to this conversation, they're going to be more encouraged to take care of themselves, and I'm going to feel even lonelier.
Yes. Well, they probably shouldn't let their partner listen to the conversation. But if they happen to show up in therapy, I would explore with the person who's heading off to the gym whether, in fact, they have relationship needs, whether they want to be in a relationship. If not, why are they in a relationship? If they're in a relationship and are not doing a good job of that relationship, they're not being effectively selfish. But in our culture, we often have this idea that selfishness is going off and being by ourselves. I don't think so. I know I have very strong relationship needs, let's say, interest in my marriage. And so it's not being effectively selfish if I don't do what I can to have a good relationship with my partner. And treating them as if their needs are not, at least theoretically, just as valid as mine is not a smart thing to do.
Yeah.
And so it's just practical to treat our partner kindly.
Yeah.
And to learn to negotiate about our differences so that each person feels that the relationship is an adequately equitable, fair relationship. Otherwise, it's like I'm shooting myself in the foot just to get a little gym time.
Yeah.
And that's not being effectively selfish, actually.
Yeah, good point.
Okay.
Okay, I have a final question for you, Bruce. What do you see as the purpose, if you will, or the potential for growth that's in intimate relationships? We spend so much of our time in this crucible, in doing this work with our partners. Many of us, this is a big focus. How do you see it changing us? Its potential.
No, I think that's a great issue. And to me, the potential for growth is very connected with the reality of how provocative relationships are. I think many of us would not voluntarily go and dig up our worst fears. We just don't want to. But our partner's guaranteed to force those difficult feelings out into the open. So if we're in a relationship for comfort, I think it's unfortunate. We're often going to get very bitter even. But if we learn to value our disturbance, then we will find that that disturbance is giving us exactly what it is we have to work on to free ourselves of our conditioned history. And if it's not brought out into awareness, it's very hard to work with. So at some point, we actually can start to be appreciative of our partner. We still want to kill them, but we can be appreciative of the fact that they, more than even a spiritual teacher probably, are going to guarantee a demand for authenticity. What we do with that demand is our responsibility, but that demand is there in intimacy, unlike almost any other part of our life. And I think that the path, a spiritual path, a path of personal growth, could be understood as basically a gradual dissolving of one's sense of self-absorption. And intimate relationships make it extremely difficult to continue our fantasy that life should be organized around what we want and our feelings and feeling safe and all those things. So our partner is probably about the best teacher most of us are going to get. And, of course, we're going to want to kill them all the time because they are.
You know, Bruce, whenever I talk to you, I sort of have the feeling of being shaken by my feet, hung upside down a little bit, and all the change falls out of my pockets and stuff.
All right.
And, yeah. And then
that's how I make my money.
Is that how it goes? Yeah. Then I kind of come back upright. So thank you so much.
It's a pleasure,
for
really.
the
I love talking
provocative
with
conversation.
You. Yes. Right.
I've been speaking with Bruce Tift. Bruce has been in private practice in Boulder, Colorado since 1979 and has taught at Naropa University for over 25 years. And with Sounds True, Bruce has released the audio learning series, Already Free, Buddhism Meets Psychotherapy on the Path of Liberation. Thanks, Bruce.
Thank you. Great series. Yes, thanks for doing it.
SoundsTrue.com. Many voices, one journey. Thanks for listening.